Alright, hi guys. So I was planning on lecturing today about 1943, but I realized the lectures I had, which are great for my 10-day course I do, we were actually running a little bit ahead, so I wanted to take time to bloat those out. So we'll pick up with 43 in the Pacific, strategic bombing, and all that tomorrow. We still got lots of time, we're doing fine. What I wanted to do is I did get some interest. I mentioned, that I do collect World War II rifles, and you don't necessarily need to take notes for this video necessarily. It might be great if they were to wind up in an essay, hint, hint, hint. But this is more just, this is more something that I think would be just kind of fun, as well as because I tend to record these at my home office. Obviously, it gives me flexibility that we would not have in an actual traditional class setting. There was a show on the History Channel years and years and years ago called Tales of the Gun. And its premise was that, if you understood this, you could better understand, warfare, you could better understand society, civilization, things like that. Well, what I thought I could do is rather than just show you images, stock photos, or whatever, talking about, World War II weapons, I thought I could show you some pieces that I actually have, talk about them, some of the history, things like that. It might just be just a little bit of fun. Who knows? You might just have this in the background while you're studying, writing a book review. Who knows? This isn't everything I have, and it's also these are what are legal to own. You could theoretically, if you had all the licensing, buy machine guns and stuff, but realistically, OSU doesn't pay me enough to be able to buy any. But instead, these are odds and ends that I've collected throughout the years that I think tell the story of the average infantryman in the Second World War. Because, and you understand, your basic guy, if we take an American World War II squad of 10 guys, 12 guys, 10 of those guys are going to be armed with rifles. And so, I think this would just give a good idea of what the average person would have used. To start off with, I think one of the, really interesting pieces I have, and I'm going to have to duck away. You're going to see me move side to side because I've got to kind of cluster everything here to make it easily, grabbable. But, actually, I've got to get up for this. Would be somebody that you normally would not think of in the Second World War. And that's the Czechoslovakians. Remember these guys all the way back from 1938, okay? This is a Czech VZ-24 rifle. Okay, this would have been adopted in 1924. And you could read by the side here, you're not going to be able to see it with this webcam, sorry, that this was made in 1939, okay? Specifically, April 1939. Czechoslovakia did not exist in April 1939. This particular rifle was made under German occupation in recently acquired Czechoslovakia. In many cases, the Germans would have used this as the Gewehr 24 Tschechische, the G24T, in lieu of their standard Mauser carbines. And these would have been, you would have been finding troops using this all the way through the end of the war on the German side. Now, in the case of this particular rifle, if you can look here, okay, you can see, I'm trying to figure it, there we go, portions of a crest there that are no longer there. Because the Germans needed these rifles quickly, they didn't bother changing the machinery at the factory. And so the factory would stamp on a rampant line, which was the national crest of Czechoslovakia. And that stayed on this rifle all the way until 1945, when the Soviets get a hold of it. And the Soviets, what they did is they refurbished a lot of these old weapons and threw them in storage in case there was going to be a war with the West. Because remember, the Soviets are going to dominate Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia is going to be communist. And what we see is what the Soviets would do when they would do this is they would destroy markings on the rifles that might have an imperialist or capitalist significance. So the rampant line was scrubbed off by machinery. They then coated this with black paint, threw it in an arms depot, if you will, and there it more or less stayed until the 1990s. And that's how many of these things come about, is, at the end of the war. And this is one of the great things, and I mentioned this, my Cold War class, is when the Cold War ended, the Berlin Wall came down, the Soviets and those post-communist countries made a killing selling surplus arms and stuff, a lot of it from World War II like this, to guys like me here in the United States who absolutely love this thing. Now, if you look, when we say Mauser, okay, Mauser refers to the designer of the rifle. This particular type of action is a Mauser action, and Mauser was a German arms designer in the late 19th century. I mean, he was designing, he got to start designing muskets back in the 1850s. Then, he and his brother designed, a series of excellent rifles. If you're hunters, you probably know what a Mauser rifle is. Generally, when we think of Mauser rifles, though, we think of, obviously, the German ones, such as this, the Karabiner 98 Kurz. This is the standard German infantry rifle. It's technically a carbine of the Second World War. Until the end of the war, if you had a German squad of 10 guys, one would have been armed with a machine gun, say a Maschinengewehr 34 or Maschinengewehr 42. The squad leader would have had some sort of Maschinenpistole, or what we would call a submachine gun. Everybody else would have a K98. Now, what's interesting about this one, this is made on German tooling, German technology. But if you can read the side, and it'll be a reversed image, I know. But will it focus? Will it focus? It will not focus. Okay, sorry. If you read Czechoslovenska Zbrojovka AS Biorino, this is made at the exact same factory as that VZ-24. This would have been produced probably 1945, 1946, and this would have been used to arm the new Czechoslovakian army until the Soviets supplied them with appropriate arms. In fact, everything about this rifle is identical to a German-issued K98, with the exception of the trigger guard. They realized that you needed something bigger for a glove. Okay, so a gloved hand. So the experience of winter fighting. Now, what's interesting about the K98, okay, is the basic action, the basic design. Again, 98 stands for 1898. There was a German long rifle, the Gewehr 98. I've got one, but I did not bring it out for today. But this would have been the standard arm of World War I. Then they made the Karabiner 98A, which was a short carbine version that would have been used for assault troops, Sturmpioniere, stuff like that. But what we're going to see is after the First World War, okay, there was a trend to shorten the size of the rifles. The British had already done it. The Americans already done it. The British with their Lee Enfield, the Americans with the 03 Springfield. But everybody else finally caught on. So in 1935, right after Hitler renounces the Versailles Treaty, that's when you're going to get the K98K, with the idea being that this was going to be a short rifle to use that everybody could use. There wasn't going to be a long rifle and a short rifle for specialized troops. This was going to be one gun for everybody. Another little interesting thing about this sling, it's of the German pattern, but this sling is Israeli. After the Second World War, a number of K98s, along with various other types of arms, were given to the new state of Israel. So there are, Jewish soldiers in the Israeli Defense Force, all, through the Sinai Crisis of 56, are using K98s. I think reserve troops in the Six-Day War in 67 were using them as well. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this is when we think of World War II, we think 41 to 45. But many of the weapons used, if they're not from World War I, have their origins in World War I, and many see service well after World War I. In fact, if we're going to go with this idea of World War I stuff, okay, a number of the things that I've got to show you are actually, either from World War I or date from World War I. I actually didn't pull out a lot of stuff. I have more than what I'm going to show you, but these are kind of, I think, the really cool ones. I don't have a French World War II rifle, unfortunately. The French would have been using the Maz 36, adopted in 1936, which, interestingly, French rifles do not have safeties. I guess they don't plan to shoot them anyway. They would have also used the Berthier Model 1916, except their grenadiers. The grenadiers, people that would have had the VB grenade launcher affixed to a rifle, would have used something much older. they would have used the Fusil d'Infanterie Model 1886-93, better known as the Lebel. And if you want to know why the French do so poorly, okay, again, they're grenadiers, so one guy out of every 10 or 12 guys would have been issued with one of these in 1940, okay. If you look at how the rifle is, okay, if you can look inside, this is a tubular magazine rifle. Okay, so whereas you might see in World War II movies where they pop a clip in, push it down, stuff like that, here, what you would do, you would take, okay, there's a little button right here. It's your magazine cutoff. Flip the magazine to on. You push down on the feed ramp. 1, 2, and what happens, the magazine is actually up through here. This little cap right here is actually the top of your magazine. It's not unlike an Old West lever action rifle. To further show how old this weapon is, and I mean this particular one was made, actually I'll tell you the truth, I don't know when this was made. The French dated their, whereas most other nations they date on the receiver, because this is technically what is the gun. The French dated the barrel. This is a 1920 rebarrel. The French rebarreled this after World War I and then just threw it into service, probably used as a VB rifle in World War II. But how old is this? I mean, they stopped making these things about 1906. Okay? This thing would have been over 30 years old. This thing would have been obsolete in World War II. But one man in every French rifle squad would have still been using one. How old is this design? This is the first smokeless magazine rifle. Okay? The first rifle using smokeless ammunition and having a magazine adopted by any military in the world. Prior to this, whether repeater or no, they were using black powder rifles. And again, one man, so this design is from 1886, and one man in every French rifle squad would have been using one. So it's, I don't, and you want to say, well, oh, it's just the French. I mean, the French are da-da-da-da-da. But if we look at the British, okay, this is actually an Indian rifle. A British short Lee Enfield Mark III Star, or as it would have been known after the 1940s, a Rifle No. 1 Mark III Star. This particular one, okay, this particular type of rifle would have been standardized in 1907. And this one, like I said, it's built at the rifle factory Ishapur in India. Now, this particular rifle, I mean, the British would have used these, again, from 1907. British troops in the China-Burma-India theater, which we'll talk about next week, in the Pacific, Australian troops, New Zealand troops, Commonwealth troops, basically everybody but Canada, would have used the short Lee Enfield. The British would have used a modernized version, but the same basic gun. Okay, this particular one has a really storied history. It was modernized. Okay, so 1918, then it was modernized sometime in the 1940s, and then again in 1967. This thing saw service in the Sino-Indian War of 1964, at a time when the Chinese are using AK-47s, the same thing that Taliban and terrorists use today. Indian troops would have still been using this. Now, one of the things I've not really talked about, specifications. The Mausers would have had 5-round magazines. They would have shot 8mm Mauser. That Lebel has an 8-round magazine, shoots 8mm Lebel. The British is probably the best of the World War I era rifles. Unlike the rest, it has a detachable magazine. Now, you didn't load it this way, but in a pinch, you could pop this out, pop another one in. That's a great advantage. Also, look at the size of it. This held 10 rounds. So a British soldier would have held more ammunition than anybody else. It also features what's called a cock-on-close bolt. When I push it forward, there's resistance. And why that's important is a British rifleman in the First World War would have been trained to fire 30 aimed shots in a minute with a rifle that was not self-loading. That is not unheard of, but this is in a class all of its own. Now, that sounds really awesome from World War I. But again, this thing is going to be, this thing is made in 1918. It sees service in India all through World War II, then Sino-Indian. I've got one, it's an Australian-made British Enfield that we know was used in the Korean War. Okay. Again, we think 41 to 45, but in many cases, these are World War I weapons being used, much, much later. And you want to think, the U.S., we've got better stuff, right? I mean, after all, at least we're not like this. And this is probably one of my favorite pieces. It's one of the first I ever bought. It's also one of the most stupid. This is a Moschetto di Truppe Speciale, 1891-24. This is an Italian special troop carbine, okay? Now, this particular one was made in 1917, and it started off as a long rifle, a model 1891 Carcano long rifle. Not the Kennedy rifle, that's a Fucile Corto model 9138. That's what Oswald used. This looks similar. This is not what Oswald used. I wish he had used this. Why do I say that? Now, the Carcano is unique for a couple of things. It uses what's called a packet clip loading system. Now, what a packet clip is you take a large stripper clip. It's actually not a stripper clip. You push it in here, you push down till it clicks, and you fire the rifle. There's a hole at the bottom of the magazine, and when it's empty, it just drops out and makes a cling sound. Think M1 Garand. You've seen that in the movies, the famous ping. I know, I'm an idiot. I forgot. I've got a Garand here. I'll show you, but I forgot to grab a Garand clip. I know. I'm sorry. I'll do it at some point later, I promise. Well, they're already doing that in 1891. Why this is stupid is, unlike all other military rifles, the Carcano used what was called progressive twist rifling. What rifling is, they're grooves in the barrel that make the bullet spin, okay? This is what makes a rifle different than a musket, or a rifle musket different than a musket, the spoonbore musket. Now, everybody else on the planet, okay, the bullet is spinning just as fast here as it is when it leaves the muzzle. The Italians said, no, we don't need to do that. With progressive, the bullet spins at one velocity here, one velocity when it leaves the muzzle, okay? Why that's a problem is, take this thing. If here's the muzzle, the actual muzzle should have been up here. But they chopped all that off when they made these carbines. So literally, the Italian army in 1924, only 2 years after Mussolini, so yay fascism, okay, were literally taking perfectly functional rifles, chopping off their barrels, and making a carbine that keyholed. What is keyholing? Imagine when you fire a bullet, okay, the pointy end, a bullet goes straight. What keyholing is if the bullet's not stabilized, it tumbles end over end. And so when you hit a target, very often instead of the bullet being pointed, the pointy end this way, the pointy end's going that way, and it smacks in like that. It's very inaccurate. You're not going to hit anything with it. And that is what the Italians do with this. Most of their other rifles are good, okay? Other than the fact the Italians were smart, and introduced a new cartridge, so there was all sorts of supply issues. This is 6.5 millimeter. In the 30s, the Italians adopt 7.35 millimeter. Then realize, oh wait, we have more of the other caliber, so let's switch back. But this, and there's not that many of these made, only about 20,000 I would suspect. I'm not actually sure. But enough that you're giving a weapon to a soldier that he cannot hit anything with, and then you're telling him, okay, go invade Egypt. If you wonder why the Italians aren't doing so hot, that's kind of why. They are snafu. What is snafu? It's a military, it's an old army thing. Situation normal, all fouled up. And I'll say fouled because I like my job too much to drop an F-bomb. I'll drop all of the bombs, but I'll drop nuclear bombs, but I'm not dropping an F-bomb. Maybe. Now, you would think the Americans are better, right? I mean, we're the best. We've got the best technology, blah, 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 blah. We have a Great Depression going on. Yeah, we have the M1 Garand. I'll get to it, the one after this. But realistically, though, We need jobs, okay? Well, we also need money. Making rifles cost money. So American Grenadiermen all the way through World War II. Marines all the way up till early 1943 were quite literally using what their dads had fought in France with. This is probably the most favorite thing I own. The Model 1903 Springfield. This is one of the best rifles ever made in all of World War II. Actually, all of World War I. This particular one was made in 1920. Then it was re-arsenaled in probably 42, 43, give or take. Now, what makes this rifle so effective? It's a World War I, standard, based on the Mauser action, 5-round magazine. If you're hunters or if you ever just pop by what goes on at Walmart, okay, in the ammunition, 30-06, that stands for 30 caliber cartridge, model of 1906. When this was adopted in 1903, okay, they then changed it in 1905 with a new bayonet mount, and then they changed it in 1906 to take advantage of this new cartridge they just developed. The 30-06 was quite literally made for this rifle. Everybody else now uses it, but it was made for this, okay? Now, what makes it? Look at the size, okay? If I stand them up together, okay? So here's how high it stands. I've got it on the floor. And then we grab that German K98. I'm too fat to do this. Hang on. Yeah. If you look, the American rifle here, made in 1903, stands about the same as this, as a German rifle made in 1935. We're clearly ahead of the game. And so the 03 continues to be a very, very, very effective weapon all the way through World War II. If you put a telescopic sight on it, you have the standard American sniper rifle throughout the end of the war. I don't know if it's true, but there was a Discovery Channel special once that said that Marines nicknamed this the weapon of silent death. If you hear this thing fire, you're already dead. This is stupid accurate. It is well built. It's finely crafted. That's why these things go for a premium. But on the other hand, even with it, we can see where Americans, and this is actually what I wrote my master's thesis on, where Americans are a little, we're not quite there fully with it with firearms technology. Let's see if you can see it. Do you see this button that says on? Okay. That means the magazine is on. Okay. So I open the bolt, pull it back. I then insert the cartridge. It's got a bolt hold open to let me know the rifle's empty. And then boom, I can fire. If I flip this to off, pull this back, see how it's not locking? The magazine is turned off, and I have turned this into an 1870s style single shot rifle. That I drop one in, close the bolt, fire, open, drop one in, yeah. Yeah, why? Because during the years prior to the First World War, American generals were actually terrified that if you gave these type of weapons to infantry, they would burn through all of their ammo in 5 minutes and then not be able to fight battles. So they were terrified this was going to happen, so they said, no, what we want to do, never mind, this is the era of machine guns, smokeless artillery, we're quite literally, this is the year of powered flight, okay? We want a mechanism where with this thing we can volley fire. That you have the sergeant ready, aim, fire, ready, aim, fire, all standing in a line. Now, eventually by World War I, we realized, okay, hey, that's stupid. But it takes us a little bit of time. So you would think, okay, if I've been going on about how these are World War I designed weapons, okay, that clearly by World War II, especially, when we look at Pearl Harbor, stuff like that we wouldn't have our stuff together. This is where the United States did brilliantly. In the words of General George S. Patton, it is the greatest battle implement ever devised. The U.S. rifle caliber 30 M1. The M1 Garand, it's designed by a Canadian, but this is American through and through. Now, what makes this thing great? If you look, it doesn't even look like any of the stuff that I've showed you. because you pull the bolt back, you have a packet clip kind of like the Carcano, you put it in, you push it down, you remove your thumb, I'll tell you about that in a second, and then it slaps forward. You now have an 8-round semi-automatic weapon. And by 1943, the period we're talking about, almost every American rifleman would have had one of these. So whereas the German guy, okay, he's got 5 rounds, he's got fire, work the bolt, fire, work the bolt. The American, pop, 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 pop. I mean, it fires every time you pull the trigger. Now, a couple of interesting things about this. By the way, this particular one, the serial number dates this to inside of 2 weeks from the Pearl Harbor attack. Think that's cool? Pull this back. The date on the barrel is May 1950. This thing was made 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor and then reconditioned for service the month before the Korean War, where this thing, again, would have seen action. Is that not cool? Now, a couple of things about this, okay? I'll do the two that everybody knows if you know anything about military weapons. One, when this thing was empty, the packet clip's empty, it would spring this back, and what happens, try to get a working shot of the action here, it springs back and then locks. And there's a spring right here that kicks that clip all the way out and clear of the rifle. When that thing then comes down, you hear a clang sound. So you might not hear it all over the din of battle, and they're not going to hear it 100 yards away. No. But if you're trying to be quiet, sneaking around a place, you fire, and you hear ping. Anybody who's close is going to know you're there. I've heard it often said that sometimes what guys would do... Sorry, I just had... Apparently, despite the fact that I'm recording, the computer didn't think I was recording. Sorry, so everything just kind of clicked out. They would carry a spare packet clip. Fire a couple rounds, 1, 2, 3. Silently reload it. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Or sorry, I can do math. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Throw it down. German guy stands up, and then you can pop, pop, and kill it. Is it true? I mean, you would have to be really, 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 really close. Okay? So I'm not going to say it's not true, but I'm going to say it's highly, highly suspect. Now, what's the other thing? And yes, I'm sorry to say, I've done this myself. When you want to close the action, right? You have to take your hand, put it right here on the operating rod, push back, stick your thumb inside and push down, let the rod forward, pull your thumb out, and then it's going to slap forward. If you don't get your thumb out of there, it will snap shut on your thumb. I have literally, laugh at me all you want, I know Dr. Moses of the history department here did when I told him. I went and I saw this thing and I went and bought it, and I teased the guy I was going to give myself. It's called M1 thumb. That's literally, they made a name for this in World War II. And I said, it's going to happen. 30 minutes. I get home, have it for 30 minutes, and I break my thumb on this thing. That being said, this thing has, it's an absolutely amazing rifle. It's light, it's handy. It has a great, peep sight, which puts it far ahead of all of these old World War I rifles. I mean, quite literally, American guys are, this is our standard arm through World War II, standard through Korea. Snipers are going to use this in Vietnam. Navy guys are going to use this aboard ships to detonate mines into the 80s. I mean, this thing is, again, as Patton said, it's the greatest battle implement ever devised. Also, there's something really cool. How good is this? Again, I mentioned the AK-47. Mikhail Kalashnikov copies a lot of the internal mechanism on this thing for the working parts of the AK. So, I mean, what John C. Garand had done was, he created a type of weapon that was absolutely, just ahead of its time. If we look at World War II, okay, the M1 Garand is the only, about fell out of my chair here, the M1 Garand is the only widely issued semi-automatic rifle of any combatant. The Soviets will have the SVT, the SVT-40, but not everybody's going to get it. Most are going to use the Mosin Nagant. I didn't bring out the Mosin Nagant because I had already tried it out during a lecture. I didn't bring out any of my Mosin Nagants. I have a Soviet 9130 from 1937. I have a model 1891 made in 1900, survives the Russo-Japanese War, captured by the Austrians, and then in 1926 sold to Finland. I have a Finnish Model 39 Mosin Nagant, and I have a Chinese Type 53 made in 1953. So again, that's also some of the longevity. I mean, the Mosin Nagant, its origins, 1891. The Chinese are making them up until 1956, as are the Poles, and I believe Romania as well. So if we look, I mean, these World War II weapons, yes, a lot of flares to the Thompson, the MP40, the Sten, all of these submachine guns or machine guns or whatever. But the average guy is going to carry a rifle. Now, I mentioned they tell the story. Okay, you kind of get one of the, for me, the really cool stories, and I mentioned that I have a particular interest in the history of the Pacific. I had a number of relatives there. Someone survived the Bataan Death March. My grandfather, Arthur Russell, who was actually responsible for me starting the career of the historian, served on the battleship Mississippi. And, he would pull me aside as a grandkid, I was a young kid, and, he would, tell me these stories. It starts the path. Well, the Japanese rifles of World War II are incredibly interesting. I actually just picked this up quite literally a month ago. This is a Type 38 Arisaka rifle. Okay, it is in 6.5 millimeter. Now, Type 38, is that the 38th rifle? No. The Japanese, what they would do is date it from the year of the emperor's reign. So this was adopted in 1905, the 38th year of the Meiji reign. Now, and I'm not trying to be racist, but on average, Asian people are shorter. But this is a thoroughly standard European-style World War I rifle. Even for me, it is fairly long and, I won't say awkward to handle, but, this compared to a 1903 or this K98 or the short Lee Enfield, whatever. It's got a folding, flip-up sight, and if you look at this, it is very, very well constructed. This particular one was made at Mukden Arsenal. Where's Mukden? Mukden is in Manchuria. Remember the Mukden incident back in 1931? The Japanese take over the Chinese arsenal there. And then in the 1940s, that arsenal makes about 50,000 rifles. And this is one of them. Now, an interesting thing about Japanese rifles, okay? Unfortunately, neither of the two that I show you have. They would have been fitted right here with a dust cover that as you open and work the action was supposed to keep dust off. But all it did was rattle, 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 so Japanese soldiers would literally throw it away. It is also a cock-on close, kind of like the Lee Enfield, but it's a Mauser action. I mean, Colonel Arisaka, back in actually 1897 with the Type 30 hook safety rifle, basically copied the weapon, and then, that particular same action is going to be used in all variations of the Arisaka. So, sorry, I just noticed a gouge in here, and I'm like, I did not notice you before. Now, what's interesting, if you look on the front, do you see how clearly finish has been removed? Every Japanese rifle would have been marked with a chrysanthemum, which was the symbol of the emperor. Remember, the emperor is considered a demigod. Well, in this case, this would have basically tried to say that this rifle was the personal property of Emperor Hirohito. And so the idea is, and what this means is at the end of the war, okay, the Japanese have to turn over all of their arms, and so what then has to happen is the Japanese then, as part of the peace said, okay, we'll do so, but we want to deface the chrysanthemum. We want to show that this no longer belongs to the emperor. So they would take bayonets, files, whatever they happen to have, and just, deface it, and then they would turn it over to the Americans. Now, why I want to mention this, why I think that these are particularly cool. If you look at the craftsmanship, I mean, this is a very stout, well-built rifle. It's interesting, if you look at the buttstock, you'll see a line. This is actually a two-part stock. A lot of these you sometimes see is, they'll separate or whatever, but this is really well made. The only actual flaw with this is, the fact that there's a little bit of wood rot in spots, and, this gouge right here. But, I mean, come on, this thing is literally 70 years old. Really well built. But one of the things that we're going to talk about as we go through this course is that submarine warfare is going to really start to constrict the flow of supplies to Japan. Okay? Remember, why does Japan need the southern resource area? Because you need tin, oil, manganese, steel, rubber, all of this stuff. Japan doesn't have it. But even as Japan starts to lose those resources, they need to get more stuff. Well, in 1939, after the ascension of Emperor Hirohito, they adopt what's called the Type 99 Arisaka. It is a redesigned Type 38, a little simpler to manufacture, and they changed the caliber from 6.5 to 7.7. So basically they switch from the Italian caliber to 7.7 would be equivalent to 303, which is what the British used. Now, as the war continues, okay, by 1943, as they run out of stuff, the Japanese have to start cutting a lot of corners. Enter what we call the last-ditch Arisaka. This is a Type 99 made at Jinsen Arsenal in Korea. Now, Jinsen is what we know as Incheon. So think landings of Incheon, Korean War. That's where this was made. If you look, this is much, much shorter to save on steel. The sight is infinitely more crude. If you can look here at the upper barrel band, notice the machining marks. Okay. Further, this is not a separate band. This is actually welded to the barrel. Okay. There is no finish on the rifle or really the wood. The sight, remember that intricate sight? We can slide this, up to 2,000, meters. It's just a fixed open hole sight set for about 300 meters. That's it. There's machining marks all over the thing. The bolt is much rough. Much rough. I can speak. Much rougher. If you listen to how it sounds, I mean, metal grinding on metal. This is an all-matching rifle, but they didn't have time to fully, trick it out. The bottom part's the same thing. Even though the stock here, again, the split, it's well made, it's a wooden butt plate that's nailed on. Okay, if you look at, a butt plate from, anybody else, they're metal and they're screwed in. That way you can move it. Here, the Japanese literally just take a hunk of wood, drive 3 not even symmetrical nails into it, and call it good. This is the ultimate, Pinterest nailed it. Now, why do they do this? Because you still need rifles. You've got to make up your losses, but, whereas these other things I've shown you are, really good examples of craftsmanship. They're all well built, they're sturdy, they're rugged. The nations who made them clearly took pride in them. Here we can see, what does this rifle tell us? If we go back to that Tales of the Gun, what can they tell? You can see the story. Here we see a story of a nation fighting an industrialized war with no raw materials, and they're forced to churn out what anybody else would consider junk. Is this safe to fire? Absolutely. I've fired it several times. National Rifle Association tests in the 1950s proved of every military rifle in the Second World War, the Type 38 and the Type 99 Arisakas were the most well built. But they are extremely crudely made. And in part, again, it goes back to that, issue of resources. One of the things the Japanese would have to do is recall certain types of coinage, back to the government. Say, okay, give us this money back. So they can melt it down for ammunition. Melt it down for copper, brass casings. The Japanese, by 1943-44, their industry cannot keep pace with the United States. So whereas we're making millions of M1 Garands, a couple million more 03 Springfields, millions of M1 carbines, the Japanese, make about 2.8 million Arisakas of all types from 1897. But by 43, 44, they are exceedingly crude. The one last cool thing I want to show you, and this is more about a rifle in the story, is the safety. Okay, if you notice there's no button. You push in, and then you rotate, then you can't open the barrel or move it. Or, bolt, not barrel. And then to fire, push in, rotate again, and you're good to go. So, I just wanted to do this again, if you've stuck through it this far, I hope you enjoyed it, if there's any military history fans out there, I've got some World War I stuff. The oldest thing I've got, I have an 1816 contract musket that, based on the year of manufacture, 50% chance that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were alive when it was made. So, made in 1826. But I wanted to show it's just something a little bit of fun, I hadn't forgotten you guys. And also, I thought that maybe seeing these, seeing this stuff, because World War II, the veterans are dying off, unfortunately. My grandfather, I mentioned, Arthur Russell, passed in 2006. My other grandfather, who flew B-24s out of Italy, passed in 1993. In a few years, much is now the case with World War I, it's these and other relics are going to be the only tangible things that people like you and I can, obtain. I mean, these are not that expensive. That Type 38 I just bought, I paid $350 for it in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Got the rifle, a bayonet, a scabbard, and a thing that holds a scabbard to the ammunition belt. These are things that we can touch. And for me, that's always been one, both a cool thing of history and also why I couldn't work in a museum. I love to touch it, to feel it, to, I can't experience it, but to hold something from the air. It makes it more real. So I hope you guys like this. Let me know what you think. We'll pick up again, like I said, with 1943, just kind of as a catch-all next week, and then we'll see how far we get. If you have any questions, let me know, and I will see you in the next video. All right, have a good one, guys. Bye-bye.